Welcome back, everyone. Up next are Kyle Palko and Mike Kanaan from the U.S. Air Force MIT AI Accelerator. Kyle is the Chief of AI Development at the Air Force MIT AI Accelerator, and he is a graduate of the Air Force Institute of Technology and the Air Force Academy. Mike is the Director of Operations and is the author of T-AI Countdown to Artificial Intelligence and the New Pursuit of Global Power. Today, they'll be discussing pragmatic thought and approaches to avoiding the pitfalls of AI contracts and development. Gentlemen.
Hey, thanks, Adam. Can everyone hear me? I'm on Bluetooth headphones and sometimes they go in and out. So like Adam said, I'm Kyle Palko. I'm a captain in the Air Force, helping to stand up the Air Force AI Accelerator at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today, me and Mike are going to tag team a couple of discussions on our history and what we've seen throughout the Air Force and the adoption of AI, specifically at closer to a unit level than broad strategies going cross services. So in this approach, we're going to take that bottom-up approach. I have some experience at AFWorks in my previous assignment, and with the cyber companies that are coming through, we see a lot of AI and ML capabilities that are being presented to the Air Force, and so we want to try to take it as provide a way for units to understand the roadmaps of how to adopt AI, and hopefully give a little bit of action items and go-dos so that you can take it back to your organization and say, all right, we need to start laying out a roadmap and this is where we go. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He's going to give a little bit of a background on the AI Accelerator itself. So go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for putting this on to Adam and everyone else who made this happen. You know, I think over the course of time for all of us and the past 2 years has been beneficial, and we're talking about the right things. But whether you're communicating with the private or public sectors, any leading technology firm, the academic institutions like MIT, where we are right now, the research laboratories, our own personnel, and any of the audiences we speak with publicly, conversations about AI largely try to answer the following questions. A, what is AI? 2, what aspects of our lives will be changed by it? 3, which of those will be beneficial and which of them harmful? 4, especially for us, where do nations of the world stand, particularly Russia and China, of course? And then the last and most important one is, what can we do to ensure that AI is only used legally, ethically, and in moral ways in line with our culture? And I think for each of those questions, the answers merit long discussions and they're open to completely different opinions, but they should at least be manageable. I think of it like this. There's an old adage that exists that Einstein is attributed with saying, you don't really understand something unless you can explain it to your grandmother. And I do think that's true, but had Einstein known my grandmother, he would have altered his words slightly, and a more precise adage would have been, your grandmother is likely the smartest person you'll ever encounter. So if she doesn't understand your explanation, it's sure no one else will either. And I think that's important for us to keep in our minds. And that's why we created the AI Accelerator, because people trust from people they know and things that they use. For instance, I'm quite certain that of the 57 people on this call right now, that there is not a single person who can build a microwave from scratch. Yet we use these microwaves every single day. The question should be, well, why do we trust microwaves? And that is analogous to most of the AI conversations, because people haven't used AI, they haven't seen it in practice, so they don't trust it, or again, don't know how to communicate about what it is. So back in April of 2019, and I think that, so we're at about the 1 year point, we had a conversation that we should develop a partnership with MIT proper, amongst our research laboratories as well, to establish state-of-the-art end-to-end sustainable pipelines for AI. And in addition to this is on the heels of largely the public conversation about Project Maven and everything else. and serve as a transparent place where commercial venture, non-traditional companies, academia, and those that leverage these things can all get together and create something. We established what's a cooperative agreement, and that cooperative agreement entails that we will work on projects with MIT Computer Science and AI Lab, which this is a group of people who defined AI back in 1956 to develop these things. As a brief overview of what we work on, before we get into the pragmatic things that we've learned and that will help the defense community outside of strategic conversation, we're developing 11 project lines. They range from R2D2 in the cockpit, Fast AI, which is bringing enhanced edge computing on legacy computer systems or devices, disaster response, of course, because that's an important mission to the United States Air Force, natural language processing, image processing, of course, dynamic scheduling, AI explained weather, GPS out navigation, anti-jamming, and cyber work. And each of these are led by an airman, which I think is important, and many of our organizations don't look at that as something that we have to do, or we just say, buy it, and we'll talk about customer engagement. I know Kyle will. But we're about a year in now, in true, in earnest, maybe 4 months in. But we do want to highlight that the accelerator exists, and now transfer into the conversation about what we've learned from Kyle's experiences and mine in deploying the technology in the DoD as well. So Kyle, over to you.
Sweet, thanks, Mike. So I did check out the audience list, and I know there's a couple contracting officers. So to make it completely clear, I am not a contracting officer. I am not even a program manager, but I have some experience in working with this. Mike's an intel officer. I'm an operations research officer, looking more on like the technology side. But from the experiences within AFWorks and working on the ML and AI cyber open topic, and then having a little bit of touch points within the Army and some DIU efforts as well. There's a couple of lessons that we've taken from deploying artificial intelligence at a unit level in the services. And so I wanted to go over a little bit of that to help kind of shape a discussion and give you guys some tools and maybe some things to think about before you get down the road of saying that we're going to start adopting AI. So overall, I have what scares me. So this is what scares Kyle. There's a lot of commanders and strategic level thinkers that just say, go do AI. We have to do AI. That's inherently not a bad thing. It's something that we're going to have to do in order to remain a strategic power. As Vladimir Putin puts it very succinctly, whoever owns and has the first to develop artificial general intelligence will rule the world. That's something that I also tend to agree with. I don't necessarily think that we're going to get to AGI within the next 20 or 30 years. But the first power to start adopting all of these practices will see such a huge increase in effectivity and optimization of the employment of forces and so many other things that we just can't even think about right now, that it's going to change the way that we conduct warfare forever. But with that, I think there's a big problem with complacency of accepting solutions just because they're AI. I see it almost as something where the Air Force is kind of sees hey, we've adopted AI, we've done it, pat yourself on the back, let's go home, mission accomplished. In reality, right, everyone here knows that AI isn't perfect when it's first deployed. It has to be continuously updated. It has to we have to have a pipeline that has continuous feedback loops, and we have to always improve. It's not something that we can deploy like a legacy software system and expect that it works 40 years down the road. The other thing that that scares me is the lack of digital skills training within the services. There are a couple of initiatives that the Air Force and the greater DoD are working on. In the Air Force, you have the Computer Language Initiative, things like Digital University, the idea of crowdsourcing and providing a democratized access to training, because in this day and age, digital skills are going to be similar to what PowerPoint was in the 90s, where you used to have to go to your digital media shop to build you a PowerPoint for your briefing, but now it's a requirement for every single person in the services to know how to build a PowerPoint. Same thing's going to happen with artificial intelligence, software development, cloud computing, things like that. So the fourth thing that I see that scares me is a lack of adoption at the tactical level. In our sense, if we think of us more as the program managers or the engineers in developing and deploying the AI, what we often tend to forget is that those on the front lines who are actually working with the sensors or in terms of like predictive maintenance, the in physical units don't often understand the value of what artificial intelligence can bring them. And so when we ask them to do something that might add 5 minutes to their workflow before they start their shift, we have to really make sure that they understand how that impacts. And we've actually seen a couple of failures in DIU space of using a really, really mature commercial technology that should have worked flawlessly, but failed ultimately because we didn't tell those end tactical users to turn on the sensor to actually start collecting the data. So those are my kind of top points of what scares me, but I'll keep moving on. So one of the, in addition to the 11 projects that we have and that we're responsible for at the AI Accelerator, one of the things that we've been doing is helping units in the Air Force work to adopt artificial intelligence. So a lot of the times we'll get invited to go help a unit to say, who says, hey, I have all these problems that I want to solve. Can you help us get off the ground? When we go to those units, we start talking with them, the biggest thing that we need to start teaching people is problem decomposition. There is a general sense that we've seen that AI is going to solve every problem. As we all know, that's not necessarily true. AI is very narrow and solves specific problems. But a lot of the problems that come to us that people say, hey, I need a solution for this, can either be solved either by process improvements, some simple automation, or just simple and like good enough optimization. So what we like to do first is sit everyone down and actually break down the problem and then find the specific pain points that can be solved by artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. Go ahead, Mike.
If I can bring that up more, and it'll go off of something that August just recently said, is there's a lot of techno-solutionism going on in the Department of Defense, in private industry. And what we need to do better is ask the right kind of AI questions, or bake in, kind of pun intended, an eye for AI. The best way to ask an AI question, and if you're going to get off the ground with a project, and we need to teach this to the lowest units, is the first thing you should do is cast a performance metric, not make a hypothesis that AI will help me in this. You have to have some performance metric you're trading off. Because at the end of the day, AI is basically like a stuff labeler, right? It boxes things. And you define the things, you as the person. And I think that the most healthy thing you could do in discovering an AI project is to start with imagining that AI isn't even real. And the first thing you should think about is what kind of drudgery in your everyday life that you would want to offload. And the rule is, though, is you can't trust these people who are building these things. So when you start thinking about AI in that sense, you start discovering problem sets that are saying yes or no to things. And the best way to discover what data or what outcomes, again, the performance metric, is to pick projects that have really high velocity on their data count, that are highly accurate, that you trust your own human model, that you're never getting wrong. And then lastly, that are really at high volume, because those are the things that machines do well. So for instance, what does that look like? It looks something like, a satellite imagery shot to say this is or isn't climate change, or perhaps, a stock trade that indicates criminal action. You have examples of things, and most of the time we try to apply AI to things we don't even have examples of that are unique and bespoke problems. So teaching organizations to think of it in that context I think is highly beneficial and will lead to then adoption and real success with AI.
That's a perfect segue into my next point of some of the thoughts when you're thinking about what you want to do to either bring in a technology or go contract out someone to help build a technology for you. We I think it was the first panelist today. There was a question that was asked about, how do we get data over to a company who's looking to build AI? And a lot of the problems that we see totally stem from data, right? Data is everything in terms of artificial intelligence. You have a model plus data equals predictions. That's the essential, like, basic machine learning pipeline. The DoD traditionally has not been very good at giving data or letting contractors use data off of our systems. Half the time, even government officials can't even get data from Air Force systems either. Like, that's the bane of my existence. So one of the things that we recommend is that to make the biggest impact to the DoD now, start looking at the unclassified use cases. Things like business automation. So how could we take finance offices or personnel offices and automate 90% of the tasks that they do so that airmen don't have to go into the office to get their pay fixed? A simple chatbot might suffice for 80% of the questions. Things like that have traditionally a lot of data behind them and even can be considered expert systems, because most of the time we have airmen who are sitting in these shops who are just following AFIs or technical manuals to say, all right, I've done this step, now I go to this step. These things aren't very difficult to necessarily achieve in the business sense. This is happening all around the world. But in the Air Force, it's very tough to put these on to DoD systems and on NIPRNet. That comes into a whole separate discussion about cybersecurity and vulnerabilities from that.
I do want to highlight something that Kyle just said that goes into practice as well. And in order to deliver these things to airmen that are contemporary and that already work, and we can at times be some of our own worst enemies. There's an austere code from 1994, I think it is. It might be 2337 or 2773 on procurement of commercial items. It wasn't really enforceable till about the National Defense Authorization Act in 2016, where we as a department recognize that commercial does lead in this sphere. We make it hard on ourselves because, generally speaking, we don't do the back-end legwork that's not very sexy to redefine key performance parameters or put in an entire different acquisition model, right? So legally speaking and lawfully speaking, you should be procuring these things commercially. And then there's a nice virtuous cycle that goes there. If you can't deliver this commercial technology by using, Par 12 acquisition, whatever, then all of a sudden you've redefined the requirements that you need on those systems themselves, right? So we have a legal obligation to procure commercially, yet what we've seen is most of the time we don't see people following that up, and you continue down the same process you were once on before, which put us in this situation.
Thanks. Yeah. So at my time at AppWorks, the MIT AI Accelerator is responsible for the Air Force's ML and AI open topic. So we see a ton of companies who are pitching the Air Force on their capabilities and what they can bring in terms of commercial solutions. One of the things, I think the last cohort had close to 300 or 400 companies who applied for that open topic. We generally put about 80 on contract every single cohort. And we're looking for, like, how do we take these companies and put them into Air Force units or joint units now with the Joint SIBR in order to give them real capabilities that they can start developing off of. What I want to kind of make clear is that there is a lot of AI snake oil salesmen out there. It's similar to what I thought I saw with blockchain a couple of years ago, where Kodak said they were doing a Kodak coin, and then their stock price went up 400%. In this sense, that we've seen a lot of companies who say, I can do AI. When you take a look beneath the hood, you can see that it's not truly AI, or it's so narrow that it doesn't have a broad applicability to multiple use cases, and then it's going to be very hard to transfer that over to the DoD. But where is the AI mature in these companies that we've seen? Content identification, just like Mike said, if you're taking a picture and you're looking for something in that, AI is very good at finding those one little, pieces within those, the features within those pictures. Image recognition is super hot right now. Medical diagnoses is being used, like AI is being used in medical diagnosis all across the board. The DoD and the Veterans Affairs, like we have one of the largest data sets of medical data in the entire world that is just ripe to be used as a training data set for the rest of the nation and the world itself if we want to publicize it. Facial recognition is getting a lot of interest, especially with the new, if anyone read Clearview or heard about Clearview recently, they built a data set based off of publicly scraping data all across Facebook and Instagram. And they said that they can have like 95% accuracy of taking a random picture of anyone in the United States or the world and figuring out who they are. Text classification is another one. The DoD runs on PDFs and runs on text and paper formats. We like to say we're a digital, leading the digital charge and transformation, but our sense of what getting like electronic format is printing out a document, signing it, scanning it, and then sending it over email instead of doing everything virtually or electronically. Speech to text is getting a lot better. Sometimes vice versa. There's still a little bit of voice recognition that has some problems. And then content recommendation engines are still maturing, but are pretty good. So where is AI not mature? Certainly in predicting social outcomes. There's just too much variability in human life. And then also with HR. So a lot of people are looking at how can we use AI to pick the next leader or, do assignments for people based on their backgrounds. That's a pretty difficult thing to say. There was that really good quote that you're never gonna, what was it? You're never gonna autonomize leadership. HR is a very tricky one. There's too many factors at play that we can't capture in data. So I would beware of looking at things like that when you have companies pitching you. And then, Mike made a really good point about metrics, your key performance parameters and your KPIs. You need to start collecting your baselines now. So figure out your processes, what you want to solve and improve on. Collect metrics on how you're doing that now, how well you're doing, the time it takes to do it, your accuracy rates or your recall rates, and then baseline that so that when you start actually looking at deploying artificial intelligence, you have something to actually compare against versus just saying, this feels like we're doing better. Value-based metrics are very important that the DoD doesn't really do well. So we spend a lot of money on things that don't really matter. But AI metrics are a little bit different than simple, like regular software or regular programs. You still have accuracy that looks at the overall performance of an AI model. But you have stuff like sensitivity and specificity, type 1 errors, type 2 errors, that really look at how well that model does in austere and often noisy situations. That is going to be something that is going to be very critical in the contracting piece to ensure that your developers are producing a product that's useful to you. If someone comes and says they have a 99% accurate model, that could be really great. But if your baseline in the data is 99% one solution or one classification and 1% the other, you've really just paid a couple $1 million for something that doesn't distinguish any better than just saying everyone is this one classification. So making sure to have proper metrics within your contracting in terms of sensitivity and specificity is going to be something that's very critical for making sure that the developers are keeping in line. And then finally, contracting authorities. Justin Lynch put this really great. There isn't a lot of expertise on artificial intelligence within the program management, the acquisition core. Generally, the expertise comes from very highly skilled and highly educated statisticians or data scientists who aren't traditionally filling the roles in acquisitions. But there has to be something that we do that gets people to the good enough solution. So, and expanding on the artificial intelligence training or education throughout the entire force is going to be really critical to make sure that we're putting proper and and tuned models on contract with companies that can actually deliver. Because as I said before, I get really worried about complacency and us patting ourselves on the back saying we're doing AI, when in fact we're working with a tier 3 company that is tricking us to say, hey, we've done this AI solution, and we say that's good enough. I think we still have a little bit of time. So some of the development problems that we've seen within a couple of the projects that have been deployed is a fallacy of time. Unlike software development, where you might be able to get a feature out in a few days or weeks, AI takes a lot of time to get working correctly. So we have a lot of leaders who are actually asking us, hey, I put something on contract and I've been working on this for the last 3 months and I haven't had anything that has been developed or is actually actionable. AI is going to take a very long time to tweak and make perfect, right? You're never going to have the perfect solution, but it's got to get somewhere close enough, and it keeps getting better as more and more data flows in and as more and more of the developers tweak the model. So we have to be completely aware that it's not like a typical software solution that can be developed in like an agile sprint, right? This sometimes takes a long time to get right. And that's going to be something that we have to get very familiar with. AI developed for one problem might not work for another problem. Transfer learning is still an open research topic. So when a company says, hey, I came in, I've done all this great work with oil and gas, this will work perfectly for you because it's all basically the same, we'll just transfer it. In general, it works relatively well to transfer that learning, but it's never going to be something that is perfectly transferable on day one. It's still going to take that time to develop, and oftentimes it's not going to work correctly because the data is different. And so whenever you hear a company that comes and says, we've done this in this industry, we can do this for you by using our models that we've developed, just be aware that yes, it's quite possible, but it is going to take you a little bit of effort to make sure those models are similar to the performance that they see in that industry that they've really done well in. And then finally, I would recommend getting your folks involved. As we talked earlier, there was a predictive maintenance program that had a really high chance of success, but failed because the lowest echelon of tactical level personnel didn't understand the value and why they were so important to the success of the mission. This also has to come to play in developing trust of AI. Unlike a piece of software where you can sit and actually get valuable feedback right away from whether or not it's working, with these artificial intelligence algorithms, you don't really know because a lot of the time it's a black box. Looking at a neural net is very difficult to see what's going on. And so this trust is going to be built by sitting next to those developers or working with them to understand how the inputs are changing the hyperparameters, or how it's changing the different model structures and what those outputs are flowing into. We've seen greater success with people who are sitting down and might not be very technical, but are sitting next to these AI engineers and asking them questions about why does it do this? Why does it do that? Why does it do this? Because that gives that inherent trust to the models that are coming out. And that is something that is generally taken a very hands-off approach in the military and the DoD with any project. And so getting your people involved with this and finding that one person who you can say, hey, this is going to be your baby, like go learn it. They don't necessarily have to be coding the development or the algorithms, but to understand and build that relationship with the developers who are doing that is going to be very critical to your success. And then finally go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just gonna, before we got to the Q&A, seeing them start to come in, I thought that I would just go through a couple of broad tactical lessons that I think we've learned and in the experience of deploying these technologies, whether they were utter failures or not as successful as they were made out to be, but just experiencing what it's like. And I guess I'll start with what many people start with is, yeah, I'm not being pejorative when people say it's all about data. And I know that it seems so obvious and that it's perhaps trite, but you'd be shocked how often we get focused on building better models than actually improving the data you are working on. And building a bigger and better model using more compute power is super cool and it's very fun, but those short-term results end up actually hurting you in the long term when otherwise you weren't loading the most appropriate data set. I can tell you that when you budget out for these things, and eventually we'll get to the point where I hope local units who do have money are putting, AI, applications into their, yearly budget and everything else below the wing level, or, whatever else for other services. And the biggest piece is that priming your environment for that space where you are loading the right and most appropriate data. You end up seeing success with AI in this way. You say, I have my performance metric. I know what data I want to collect. Then you build a model, put it on the right compute. Then you deploy it and watch it in the wild. And if within a few months, you aren't seeing yourself now asking new questions, which means you're measuring new data to reinform a new model, then your AI project was probably pointless. Kyle at number 2, Kyle had highlighted, why it's so important for user engagement. Most of the major roadblocks generally haven't ever been technical. They were just in communication. Because if you are sitting next to an engineer, that's the role of the engineer or the programmer, is to fix your technical challenge. But the conversation both internally and externally was far worse. Generally speaking, it was a mismatch in requirements of what the provider is giving to us, or what machine learning could offer. Then internally, people wear many hats, they do too many things. So how do you fix that is to engage with both sides of the equation much better than we probably have. When you do that, however, what we've also learned is that people get hung up on the next thing that's state of the art as opposed to stable and already exists. I can't tell you how many times we were in the red zone or on the goal line of delivering meaningful applications, yet what ended up happening is we pivoted and said, well, check out this new model from Facebook, that, is key vectors in memory and everything else. No, just deliver something that works, then move forward. And I had mentioned, talking about people and the gaps in being able to communicate about it. One of my favorite exercises, and I know August highlighted this in the writing space too, was to sometimes literally try to talk to a rock. And it seems so absurd to even say, but when you have to communicate in that way, verbally and out loud, it really helps you to decompose what it is you're talking about and what you're actually trying to do in the space, which means you should be your own biggest, skeptic of the issues that you have. You should not buy that this, model is accurate, so that we lead down a path to a better ethical and moral conversation. And then lastly, don't try to boil the ocean. What stupid, people are like, well, that's a stupid problem to solve, or that's a toy problem that people like to use. Those are the things for AI. That's the best projects that you can choose, because again, you're just trying to do 3 things that we couldn't do in the industrial age. And that was buy back time, value, and accuracy. In the industrial age, you had to turn off, 2 to get the 3rd, or vice versa. But with software, you can do all those things. And when you think of it in that stance, you start to realize there are better projects than the ones we're generally choosing to put our hats against. And I think that's an important note. So I'd love to open it up to questions, and hopefully this was valuable.
I'll put one last thing. I think a lot of these small AI projects are going to fail, but either fail or not provide much value. But the ones that are, we also need to understand that we can find them and help them bubble to the top, so we can help spread that widespread adoption of the good practices and good programs that work.
Excellent. First question is from Scott. Thank you for the perspective. So I lead a wing, and my team on the personnel side has yet to really step out of the box and look at chatbots and AI type innovation to create more efficiencies within their daily life. Where can they go to get their hands on proven tools to incorporate into daily life?
Oh, I'm like totally happy to to take this one because I think it's, patently absurd the amount of time that we spend on perhaps reading papers and trying to find what, again, the state of the art is, when what already exists in GitHub repos will work for you. And what do I mean by that? I think that it's time for the DoD and people in this room to start redefining what an AI requirement is, not what is AI, but in its essence, is AI research or is AI operations and maintenance dollars? Well, inherent to AI, you should be building it on the everyday data workflow, and then also you should be then putting that against research into new data sets and discovering new ways of implementing it. So it's both at the same time, and we haven't had a hard conversation on characterizing it that way. Of course, the Defense Innovation Board suggested make all software dollars, colorless. To a certain degree, yeah, I wish if we could, what would that bill look like? $20 billion or something? That's hard to account for, but in the space of AI, there is. When it comes to RPA and journeying towards this, really virtuous cycle of relearning and deploying a real AI application, just use the GitHub repos that are available. The same, optimization algorithm or analogy detection type of, or anomaly detection type of algorithmic work that you would deploy into a pharmacy to see somebody who is abusing drugs is the exact same thing you would deploy, just repurposed on a different data set to deploy into, the budgeting process to find redundancies or missing spaces. So I think that the first thing to do is to get to a place where, we're talking about unclassified does not mean unsecure. So if you pick up a model online that's an optimization model or whatever, and you throw it over the fence into something that we control, a data set that is classified, or we trust that hasn't been manipulated or poisoned or something, then inherently nobody knows the weights of that model anyways. So I think that the best thing to do, especially in RPA, is to deconstruct the problem and realize that your problem is actually not something that hasn't been already built in a GitHub repo somewhere in the world.
I would also add that services like Google Cloud Platform and AWS and Azure all provide some of these APIs that you can go and test out. The AutoML that is being developed is end-to-end pipelines within these cloud services can give you the opportunity to go prototype and say, what if we did something like this? And most of those services actually give you $300 of free credits a year to go test it out. Getting up on those and just building those end-to-end pipelines and putting in that dummy data just to give your boss or your own unit kind of the sense of this is the art of the possible is something that I think is really, really important that people, including all of our airmen, could go and try out.
Great. From Joe, what progress is being made for computer language initiatives? Are airmen taking advantage of the programs, and is that scaling to other services?
So first thing, we were very happy in Section 238. It is in the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act with key hook language for aptitude and proficiency testing. Building an aptitude and proficiency test isn't necessarily easy work or not things that have been done. So that's already funded, and the Air Force is working with our language counterparts who develop aptitude testing for onboarding human foreign languages to monitor how do we onboard and test aptitude for computer languages. And you might find it surprising that, in fact, there are 5 areas of your brain that ignite, proper kind of word, when you're learning a human foreign language, and 3 out of the same 5 when you're learning a computer programming language do so the same way. So first off, those are being built as we speak. Just recently for the Air Force, we hosted our Capabilities Development Council, and you see many mentions of Digital University, which just got dropped in there for beta testers. The computer language initiative model will be deployed underneath Digital University and everything else. So we're really excited about that. But furthermore, the Senate Armed Services Committee the House and everyone else is very much tracking this, but again, it's in the National Defense Authorization Act. So there is a due requirement that within, 180 days of the act, et cetera, which will really be 270, that will roll out. Frankly, it's been funded in earnest in 22. So I think we'll see significant advancements. The self-assessment still exists out there, at least in the United States Air Force. And for what it's worth, there are over 3,500 people who have raised their hand and said, I know these languages for these purposes. So I don't want to say hurry up and wait, but in order to do a POM build on MilPERS dollars, I think this is, accelerated at a very rapid pace in comparison to what we usually pull off, knowing that there is money in 22.
From Ronco, what is the experience in the field with using active learning to bootstrap data collection by querying operators for feedback? Are they able or interested to interact with the system and teach it what they want from it? In our experience, Enterprise Edge ML services, this is a much more effective way of building high quality data sets and identifying tough corner cases.
I couldn't agree more. I think that we had mentioned about getting the right language, like like commercial APIs into contracts. It will be built on the most recent, release of Anaconda or something like that, so that we're always able to update and better team with commercial. I think one key critical component are requirements that we are generating training quality data within the workflows. Generating training quality data, as we've learned over the past few years by sending people to go label cars, that doesn't work. You need quite literally hundreds of millions across different classifications of representative imagery, in this case we'll say, that could reasonably detect a car at human performance levels. But we could do a much better job if you get really slick about making a requirement to generate training quality data within the workflows. So what would that look like? Well, it would look like working with an airman in a distributed common ground station and saying, well, how are you annotating what you just saw? And can we draw a box that doesn't take away what you're working on right now so that we can spit that out for TQD? Or perhaps for somebody at the Pentagon level who's working on the budget and all they have to do is just highlight a single field to say, hey, I want to train on this and send that data back because this is a good example or a poor example or whatever it may be. So I think the best thing that we could do, in highlighting a really good point, is to make clear that we expect we will generate training quality data within our workflows, whatever that looks like for whatever career fields.
So I'm going to add a little side note to that. There was a really cool experiment that Army Futures Lab did, Army Applications Lab, part of Army Futures Command, did with taking algorithmic coders from finance and industry and putting them on the front lines of special operators to actually build models and to build software that would be most beneficial to them in the moment. So instead of relegating this back to a huge program, they put them directly with the end users and got stuff deployed within a few days, which turned into massive data collections. That was really, really important and really, really valuable. And so finding ways that we can create almost like a warfighter coder or a warfighter AI developer is going to be something that I think the Air Force and the rest of the DoD is going to have to look at very closely. How do you put us closer to the front lines to help out the ones who are actually going to be interacting with it day after day, instead of keeping us siloed back in research labs?
Brandon has a question that is probably the bane of your existence. Automation versus augmentation versus artificial intelligence. How do we get people to start using the right words?
There's a distinction and a difference with these words when we use them interchangeably. There's a difference when, senior leaders or any of us, frankly, are communicating with an engineer and you're like, I want AI for that. And they look and they go, well, what do you mean? There's plenty of techniques to use. Or you would rather really want automation here. And I think that it's really important to have our workforce to understand the difference, because when you use the word automation, make no mistake, there are laws that you must follow and realities that we have to pay attention to. And AI should not be binned in automation when we're talking about, illuminating redundancies in the budget or something, the stuff we should be paying attention with AI on, as opposed to thinking, let's put AI in warfighting operations or JADC2. That's absurd. We're not even good at using them in our support operations. So that should be the sexy problem we put on it. Well, we're very involved in the digital university aspect as one of the key courseware and classes to take that breaks out for any leader, frankly, in national security, why these words have a difference and a distinction. I think we just need to keep telling people that these words mean something. There is a difference between the concept of AI, the application of machine learning, and the technique of deep learning, and we need to make that an everyday language. So at least through digital university, we're doing our best. But gone are the days of the Department of Defense not talking about AI, which we used to not do for about a year and a half there. So just talking about it more and every day, because it is cool and it is important, I think helps us get there so we can use the jargon appropriately.
What are the most successful or valuable toy projects, quote unquote, you've seen that might work across the DoD? What environment are you working in? AWS, GovCloud, locally hosted, et cetera? That's from James.
I'm going to let Kyle highlight a couple of those, but basically all of the above, which is, exemplary of sort of the problem itself. Listen, at the end of the day, we just need to make sure these things communicate. One of the ones I've been most excited about that has been unnecessarily hard to get off the ground is a project we ended up releasing to our squadron officer school students to discover AI problems they should work on. And of course, inevitably, it was all the JADC2 stuff. But one of the groups was really on their game. They said robotic process automation in the PCS process. So moving us as airmen. Generally speaking, all of those data sets, a human who sits there is just checking the other data set to make sure they can release the orders and everything else. So the end state was to release orders before or at the time of identification of movement. And it was just a human in the loop problem that we didn't need to have. And getting that project off the ground, because it's not quote unquote sexy, has been the most difficult thing to do. But I think it has immense implications for an airman's, livelihood, to make sure, when they have orders, they're able to go to their local hospital to ensure, when their spouse or when their child is sick or having a baby, that they're not going to a commercial hospital because they don't have orders, so they can't even go on base. I think stuff like that is the coolest stuff to work on. I don't, in personal Mike opinion, I just can't stand the whole trying to do this in warfighting operations when we're not good at it otherwise, and they're the same underlying techniques. That one's cool to work on. I'll let Kyle discuss some of the enclaves in which we're building.
Yeah, so personally, here at the Accelerator, a lot of the work that we're doing is more focused on the research. That research is really being conducted on on-prem supercomputers at MIT, with a little bit of help from Kessel Run within GovCloud and Cloud One. I think the entire DoD is going to be moving to a hybrid cloud solution. We're looking at how do you deploy ML to the edge? How do you run ML in the cloud? How do you run ML on our local devices? We're pretty agnostic with how we develop and deploy this right now. In that sense, I do think that you're going to see, we're probably going to be moving towards whatever the Air Force is using, especially on the Cloud One, since one of our main partners is Kessel Run and H&I.
And I'll highlight the work, pay very close attention to the work being done at the Joint AI Center with the Joint Common Foundation. Frankly, those technical specifications are really all that should matter. And then what you're building, just make sure that it can be shared and communicate. But I think that's an important topic, because if you choose an opinionated tech stack, then you inevitably are not going to share. And I think ultimately it's getting down into the weeds. So tactical conversations of today are the strategic decisions of tomorrow. And that's stuff like, are you on AutoML or PyTorch or MongoDB and blah, blah, blah. You can, because this is all, inherently unclassified work in order to develop it. We just have to make sure it communicates. So you got to make sure, you know, we have those conversations. Basically, what are the tech specs?
See, from jungle, culturally, there's still a massive knowledge gap within DoD that hear GitHub and are already lost. That level of digital literacy seems to struggle to scale. How do you recommend breaking that barrier so we can speed trust and just connecting and sharing data?
I don't want to say it's a hurry up and wait and, you know, let young people rule the world. But I do think if you imagine walking into like the boardroom of JP Morgan, and you're like, all right, Jamie Dimon, what do you do for me? Or what do you actually do here? Inevitably, he's going to say the words AI at some point in time in that conversation. And if you're like, wait, tell me a little bit about that, right? He would say, I don't know, you know, ask, you know, this person who probably looks very different than he looks. So teaming the techniques of the old with the ideas of the new is a good hack to the system. And in our organizations, you know, at the chief of staff level should probably be somebody in that room who is contemporary and, you know, under 30 and working on this stuff. And I think we just need to keep showing our value and that we can think strategically to be in those rooms. And you see it happening in some places, and we should celebrate those stories everywhere.
I think that was your drop right there. If anyone wants to know, I'm trying to get Mike's call sign to be called Drop, so like Mike Drop, because he's a very good speaker. And yeah, but I agree. We're seeing a lot of adoption throughout the Air Force, at least, with senior level thinkers and chief engineers who don't understand all of the technology behind it. But they're bringing in a 2-striper or a 3-striper to sit next to them and say, okay, what does this mean? What do you recommend? It's a lot less of this, you know, the traditional military culture of I outrank you, I'm making the decisions, and more of who here is the actual technologist who understands and can help me make a better decision, which I think is going to be something that will take a little bit of time to kind of spread throughout the entire culture. But I've seen a lot of really great adoption of that, you know, through organizations like Kessel Run and Bespin and Space Camp, to more like greater organizations within the acquisition community as well. And that gives me a lot of hope, because when you have the junior level airmen who are doing this on their free time because it interests them and they take a personal interest versus their career, those are the guys that I want to be working with my chief engineers to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think in the spirit of AI, since, you know, you don't know the answer, you don't know, right? It illuminates new strategies and new questions to ask. Humility in the digital age, so that when we're older, as, you know, kind of, you know, I mean it in the esoteric sense of older because I've gotten older. It's empowering other people. Like, humility in the digital age is not talked about enough.
Excellent. Kyle, mic drop. Thank you. And that's going to do it for us, everyone. And I just wanted to share a few things on the way out. So in terms of background, what led to this event was really just a group of DEF members seeing that, you know, with current efforts, the U.S. is well positioned to lead in AI in the future. But that leadership is definitely far from guaranteed. And it's the work that you all are doing that is really moving the ball forward. And so we appreciate your involvement and attending this today. Now, in terms of what's coming up in the coming weeks, as you know, today was supposed to be the physical event in Boston and was canceled because of the health crisis. We still plan to hold the physical event in the near future, but it's a little bit too early to know when we might do that based on what's going on. So there's a strong possibility we'll do an additional virtual event in the lead up to the main event, but we are still planning to hold DefX Boston AI Strategy and Defense at MIT in the near future. And in terms of what we need from you all, you know, this is great. Your engagement, your questions, your input, and volunteering your time like this is very important. And we're working with the Defense Innovation Board, the JAIC, NSCAI, and other groups that are implementing AI in order to determine what are the useful end products of these events that will help them in their mission. And so we're likely to produce a report or some type of white paper after the physical event in the future. So just know, everyone, that this is important, and your contributions and participation here are gonna be meaningful. And you know, the other piece too is just it comes back to you know, the members that comprise DEF. Many of you are working on these problems every day, but what you all have in common is that most of you are leaders in your field of some sort. You're motivated and empowered, obviously, because you're part of DEF. And we hope that these events will also inform you and give you tools and information that you need to go out and be change leaders in your respective organizations. So I want to really thank everyone for joining today, and stay tuned on the DEF Slack channel for updates about upcoming events. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.